Hello and welcome to News Central Television. I am Chiwete Onyema. Here are some of the stories making rounds beyond the continent. We begin with the news in Israel, where tensions have escalated sharply as Israeli troops gather near Gaza border and smoke have begun rising from targeted areas. Now, this comes as Israel's defense minister approves a full-scale military plan to seize control of Gaza City. About 60,000 reservists have been called up, intensifying pressure on Hamas amid ongoing ceasefire negotiations. A footage from the Israeli side shows heavy bombardment as international mediators continue to urge restraint. Now, the assault marks a major new phase in the conflict, with concerns growing over the humanitarian toll.
להנחיית הדרג המדיני ולאחר אישור התוכניות על ידי הרמטכ"ל, צה"ל החל בשלב הבא במערכה, שלב ב' במבצע מרכבות גדעון. אנחנו נעמיק את הפגיעה בחמאס בעיר עזה, מעוז טרור שלטוני וצבאי של ארגון הטרור. נעמיק את הפגיעה בתשתיות הטרור מעל ומתחת לקרקע וננתק את תלות האוכלוסייה בחמאס. אנחנו לא מחכים. התחלנו את הפעולות המקדימות והשלבים הראשוניים במתקפה על העיר עזה. וכבר עכשיו, כוחות צה"ל אוחזים בפאתי העיר עזה. אנחנו ממשיכים לאפשר סיוע לאזרחי הרצועה, ואף מרחיבים אותו. נקים מרכזי חלוקת סיוע נוספים. שיטה זו תנתק את התלות של האוכלוסייה.
In Israel, protesters and families of hostages held in Gaza have marched from Kibbutz Be'eri to Nelva Music Festival Memorial Site. Both locations were targeted during the October 7, 2023 attacks by Palestinian militants. The protesters are demanding the immediate return of all remaining hostages, estimated to be around 50 people.
It is the time to bring them back home. We never know what will happen if this hostage will not take place. We never know when the next window of opportunity will be. And as well, a call for humanitarian call. With the humanitarian aid that goes into Gaza, I call all the leaders of the world to make sure the humanitarian aid is getting to the hostages.
Right now, human rights lawyer Mamelue Sabeh joins us from Johannesburg to weigh in on development in the Gaza war. We also have Lieutenant Colonel Maurice Hirsch standing by to have this conversation. Now, Lieutenant Maurice Hirsch is the director of the Initiative for Palestinian Authority, Accountability and Reform in Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. He's also the former director of the Military Prosecution for Judea and Samaria. He joins us from Jerusalem. Welcome, gentlemen. I hope you guys can hear me clearly. I'm going to start off with you, Maurice. What is your opinion on Israel planning for an offensive against people in Gaza who are unarmed, of course, and what are your sentiments of the people of Israel on this?
5 days ago, the Gazan people, the terrorists in Gaza, decided to rise up, invade Israel, and carry out the worst massacre in Israel's history. These are people who had fired thousands of rockets at Israel. These are people who hid in mosques, in hospitals, in schools, in clinics, in kindergartens. These are genocidal jihadi terrorists whose goal is very clear: to murder Jews. And so I think that it is certainly a good thing that Israel has finally decided to get rid of these terrorists, to break them finally. I just want to tell you, on the 7th of October, the massacre was carried out by about 6,000 terrorists. The Gaza force of Hamas still numbers about 10,000 terrorists. So what really is happening when you say that they're unarmed? This is simply not true. They are armed to the teeth. They have weapons that they are still exploding on Israeli soldiers. They are still attacking Israeli soldiers. Just yesterday, we saw an incident where 15 of the terrorists came out of the tunnels that they've dug underneath Gaza and attacked Israeli soldiers. That argument that they are unarmed is simply not true. They are armed jihadi genocidal terrorists, and they need to be wiped out for the good of the Gazan people and for the good of all humanity.
I'll come to you now, Mamelwe. Under international law, is the mass displacement of civilians from northern Gaza, such as those expected in Gaza City, legally justifiable during military operations?
I mean, the international humanitarian law, specifically for Geneva Conventions and, of course, its additional, protocols, it is very clear. It highly restrict and prohibit mass displacement of civilian population from their homes, from their communities, especially outside those extremely limited, situations like for their own protection. And I think in any event, it can never be a permanent displacement. And what we are having here is, a clear genocidal logic. And I think you can hear from the gentleman on the other side. I mean, really, I would say that I feel even offended that we're still, even debating people like this who are racist, who are genocidal, and should not even be given an air in the first place. Because what they are trying to justify is unjustifiable destruction of human life on a scale that we have not seen in modern times. In any event, Israeli objectives are not in any way military anymore. They are colonial, and is about ethnic cleansing and genocide against the people of Gaza, which can never be justified, and it is certainly a war crime.
Morris, let me come to you now. Critics say Israel is not willing to end the war, especially by rejecting the latest 60-day truce proposal in favor of a full hostage release. In your view, do you think Israel is willing to end this conflict?
Of course, Israel is willing to end the conflict. Israel didn't want to start the conflict. The people who started the conflict are the genocidal terrorists in Gaza. They could end this war any day by releasing immediately and unconditionally all of the hostages that they are holding, by surrendering and giving up their arms. The war could end immediately today. And that is what Israel is pushing to do, to end this war. We do it in accordance with the laws of war. We do it in accordance with the precautions that the laws of war impose upon us. That is how we fought all the way along. My previous speaker clearly has no idea about the laws of war in any way, shape or form. If he believes that it is unlawful to allow people, non-combatants in a war zone, to flee that war zone, then he simply has no idea about contemporary warfare, how it's fought, and what are the laws that require actually allowing that population to move out of the way. That is what Israel has done all the time. Israel has dropped more bombs on Gaza than people who have been killed, and that is a clear sign that Israel is taking all of the precautions of the laws of war. We are targeting the terrorists. We are targeting the people who want to get up tomorrow and murder more Jews. And we will continue targeting those terrorists until they are all killed. Because otherwise, we are simply inviting another October 7 massacre on ourselves. We are really condemning the hostages to die in the hands of these genocidal terrorists. And that's something which is unacceptable. And I can tell you quite clearly, almost the entire Israeli population are behind the goals of freeing the hostages and destroying Hamas and ensuring that they can no longer carry out massacres like they carried out on the 7th of October. And that, apart from very fringe elements, is the dominant idea.
Now, Mamelwe, given the scale of the planned offensive and the number of civilians still in Gaza, what obligations does Israel have to, ensure that civilian protection, are minimized?
I mean, Israel has, dismally failed over the past 3 years. I mean, since October 7, to show, any adherence to law. I mean, the principle of distinction between military targets and civilian population. That, I think, is borne by the fact that overwhelming majority of the victims in this, genocide are, of course, women and children and elderly people. And that shows that there is also no precaution that has been taken to protect them. But also, there are just a whole-scale destruction, of civilian infrastructure, hospitals, hospitals and water, electricity infrastructure. They are also being denied supply of fuel, of any basic necessity, including food and water that can sustain life. So there is collective punishment here of the entire population, and that is simply a war crime. And I also want to say this: the people of Gaza do have the right to resist. I do not even support that those that are rising in resistance against colonial settler regime that has been dispossessing the people of Palestine of their land for decades now, that those people are simply terrorists, that those people deserve to die. Those people, like us here in South Africa, we resisted, we fought apartheid, and I have no qualms in saying those that, of course, died for our liberation were heroes, and we're fighting for our rights, for our lands, and I think the same thing applies to the Palestinians.
All right, Maurice, let me ask you this question now. From a legal perspective, right, how does Israel justify large-scale operations in densely populated areas like Zaytun and Jabalia, where the risk to civilian life is exceptionally high?
Well, so part of the solution is allowing those civilians to move out of the areas. That's why Israel issues the evacuation orders. We try and move the civilians out of the way so that we can fight in whatever surroundings it is, focusing on the terrorists. Unfortunately, you have a situation in the Gaza Strip where the terrorists intentionally use the civilian population as human shields. They put their women and children in front of them to ensure that they are killed, so that people can come on news programs and say, well, there's a genocide going on, making all types of ridiculous claims like that. And this is their right to resist. This isn't a right to resist. The October 7 massacre wasn't a right to exist. It was in and of itself genocidal. It has nothing to do with resistance. And fighting in urban environments isn't something new. It happened in Afghanistan, it happened in Iraq, it happened in other places. This is the war on terror, where you have these terrorists who use the urban environment in order to hide their activities, to hide behind women, hide behind children, hide under hospitals, hide in schools, hide in mosques, hide in kindergartens. That's what they do. They have no respect for human life. The opposite is true, as their leadership has said. We want and we need the death of the children in order to push forward with our genocidal goal of destroying Israel. That is what we're talking about. We're not talking about resistance. We're not talking about anything else. We're talking about genocidal jihadi maniacs trying to murder Jews. And it's a shame and a disgrace that you can bring possibly onto a program someone who would justify that type of an activity.
All right, so I'd like to understand that the conversation we're having right now, gentlemen, is quite, it's of course brings about some expression of passion. But then again, it's only good that when we have conversations like this, especially on television, we should try as much as possible to respect the other person. So let's be careful with the kind of words that we use on this program. Thank you very much. But moving on now, I'm going to come to you, Mamelwe. If reports confirm that civilian infrastructure like hospitals or schools are being hit, how does international law define proportionality, and when does an attack become unlawful?
I mean, when you have a situation where, the attack, is calculated clearly, as the Israeli military objectives are, to make the life unbearable, not just for the fighters in resistance, against the occupying army, but actually the civilians with the stated objective that their ministers have again and again stated, that it is actually to depopulate and to cleanse Gaza and the whole of Palestine of its people as part of, a settler colonial project that is called a Greater Israel. That when you have that, and that's reflected also not just on the people that died directly from, the military operations, which already are having an extremely high, right? Civilian casualties that can never be justified. But even just people that are dying, right? Trying to look for food. People that are dying because of this damage, who are dying in hospitals that have been bombarded, who are dying in schools, who are dying, basically trying to seek shelter, even in areas where the Israeli regime itself has pointed to them as safe zones. None of that can be justified as proportional. And of course, it's in clear violation of the law. But I think also it really confirms the genocidal logic of this campaign. There is absolutely no justification. And I think you just have to listen in the most sensible sections of the Israeli societies, their own professors at universities, but also even hundreds of thousands that have taken to the streets in the past few days in Israel, who are saying there's absolutely no justification for the new and renewed offensive that is actually taking place. Not only is it not going to save the hostages, but actually it is calculated to only inflict more death and displacement of the Palestinians.
Mamelo, for some reason, I'm not sure I can hear you anymore, but I'm going to come to you now, Morris. What role, if any, do you believe international pressure or legal scrutiny plays in shaping the IDF operational decisions in Gaza at this stage of the conflict?
So let's put this into context. As has been said by legitimate military commentators, there has never been a war fought in an urban surrounding as Gaza, above ground, below ground, on the ground, better and well executed than Israel has carried out the war in Gaza. It doesn't exist in the history of warfare. Israel has set, as John Spencer, the head of urban warfare in West Point in the US Military College, has said, Israel has set a new gold standard for urban warfare. That is what, unfortunately, most people don't know. In answer to your previous question, what happens, what does international law say about a situation where terrorists use a hospital as a military base? What then happens? What is the rule for that hospital? It becomes a legitimate military target. That is the very simple answer. That is the way that wars have been fought all the way along. And that is, unfortunately, what the terrorists know in order to manipulate international public opinion. Well, Israel is attacking hospitals. Well, that's because you're using the hospitals as military bases. That's because that's where you took the hostages when you kidnapped them on October 7. That's where you've been holding them until now. That's where your military commanders, just pay attention as to where Mohammed Sinwar, the head of Hamas after Yahya Sinwar, where exactly was he killed? Under the European hospital in a Hamas tunnel where he had been hiding with other senior Hamas members running the military operations of Hamas, abusing a hospital, using it as a shield, as a human shield for his activities. That is something which international law specifically says is illegitimate, is illegal, and it turns the hospital, which would in regular circumstances enjoy relative immunity, it turns the hospital into a military target. That's what international law says. And when you talk about proportionality, what is proportionality? Proportionality isn't judged on the wider basis of the entire conflict. Proportionality is a specific test which is run as regards every single target. Is the value of the target or is the collateral damage greater than the value of the target that's being achieved by the onslaught? And that's really the question. It's nothing else other than that. And Israel has met that requirement of proportionality all the way along. When you talk about destruction, of course there's destruction in the Gaza Strip. Hamas had dug, instead of building upwards and building prosperity, they had dug an underground tunnel system of 650 miles. It's all over the Gaza Strip. That is their terrorist base that they refuse to allow civilians even to look for.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for having this conversation with me.